Wonderful. All right, we're going. Let's do this.
Oh my God, has it started?
So yeah, we're live. Nobody's on yet, but we're in. I'll wait till the clock strikes 10, but we can just kind of casually talk
Flex
or whatever.
those shoulders.
Dance a little bit.
They didn't hire me for my dance skills.
Oh, fair enough. Oh man. There we go. All right. So we are live. So I'm here, PourCast, Anthony from PourCast here with Stephanie Shen, the cocktail connoisseur, the brand ambassador with the Dead Rabbit whiskey. So Stephanie, feel free to introduce yourself. Let's jump right into it.
Hi. So hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Shen, as you have already mentioned, but so I'm the global brand ambassador for Dead Rabbit Irish Whiskey, and I'm basically just a nerd who likes whiskey. So I mean, that's it in a nutshell. I worked in the bartending industry in Dublin for about 10 years. So I worked in a variety of different venues. I worked in high volume. I worked in like nightclubs where everything was sweaty and sticky and raw and wonderful. And then I also worked in like places where you wear a shirt and you like serve really nicely. So like I've run the gambit of cocktail bars. And through that time, I've just kind of always had a love for Irish whiskey. And then this job came up and they were like, hey, Steph, do you like cocktails? And I was like, yes, I do. They're like, do you like whiskey? I was like, yes, I do. Do you like talking? And I was like, yes, I do. And so here I am.
Sounds like perfect.
Dream job. Yeah, it's amazing. But yeah, so today, it was World Cocktail Day like 2 days ago, the day before yesterday, and then today is World Whiskey Day, so it's very exciting. I'm obviously very, very pumped up about this, and so I figured that now that we know who I am, we might as well just have a drink so we can all get comfy. And yeah, so
sounds good.
Just dive right in, because like there's no point in me like babbling away about whiskey and how delicious it is if you don't have something to sip on. It also gets a lot easier to listen to me when you have a little drink. Okay, so
I like it. So what are we starting with?
Carrot juice. So this is super, super easy to make. It's really delicious, and the alcoholic strength isn't that high, so it's actually perfect for brunch. So there's only 3 ingredients that you need. There's Dead Rabbit Irish Whiskey, Campari, and orange juice. Now, I did say that you might need a blender, but I am very aware that you perhaps do not have access to a blender.
Not at the moment, no.
Like, oh, maybe. So, I mean, like the easiest way to do this is if you have a blender, but if you don't have a blender and you're making drinks at home, if you have a shaker or if you have a jam jar, anything like that will work. So basically what we're going to do is we're only going to shake the orange juice without any ice. So what we want to do is we want to make that orange juice super, super fluffy. And because we're introducing so much air, what it does is it kind of changes the texture of the orange juice. So we want it to be very fluffy. So it's going to kind of become lighter in color. And, you know, if you have a blender at home, it's going to be so easy because you just whap it in and go ba, ba, ba. But Anthony, I think you're going to have to like work those gun muscles.
Well, it can do. All right. So are you going to be joining us or making
So I like, you know, obviously I have the blender set up in the corner, so I'm just side-eyeing it right now. But that's the fastest way to do it. But so just make sure that when you're shaking it without ice, because you just want to like, you're going to have to just get super agitated with that orange juice to get that texture that you really want. It's going to be really silky. It's going to be super lovely. I'm going to like nip over to the blender. So you're going to hear horrific noises now for like 10 seconds.
That's no problem. I'll just keep doing my arm workout in the camera.
I may have cheated and like pre-blended it to make it super efficient. So like you're just going to have to shake for like the next 5 minutes or so.
Is that really the equivalent, or are you just messing with me?
No. It's just making sure that you're kind of like, so what you want is to achieve like a lighter color. I'm so sorry. My lighting is terrible in here. Like the makeup tutorial. Can you see this? I'm clearly really bad at this. But yeah, it's just a little bit lighter. It's a little bit fluffier. And so what you want to do
by now, or do I keep going?
So just crack open your shaker, have a look, and if the orange juice is frothy and it's a little bit lighter in color than when it was when it went in, then you're good to go.
We're gonna go with that. All right. So do we put the orange juice in as a base, or is it like kind of like a topper?
So it's a topper. So what I have in my long glass here, my highball, is I have 1 ounce of dead rabbit and 1 ounce of Campari. So
Okay.
I put them in, and then I'm gonna put some ice in the glass, and then I'm gonna top it up with that sweet, sweet, silky orange juice. So I'm just gonna slide over here for my ice.
All right. Stephanie's prepared. I'm here just fumbling through it in front of y'all. So we've got orange juice or Campari. We've got the dead rabbit, 1 ounce of each.
Yeah.
And
1 ounce of each. Fill up your glass.
a little extra frosty.
Oh, that extra frothy OJ. And then you're just gonna sloop it in on top. Like
some more ice. So we got all that. And topping it off with frothy orange juice. So
yep. And so because the orange juice is aerated, it'll pop a little bit. So you just want to get your spoon. Bonus points if it has a little bunny on top. And then you just gonna kind of gently.
I apologize. Unfortunately, mine has a little J on top.
Oh.
You guess where I got it from.
Oh, 3 guesses. 3 guesses. But yeah, so you just want to make sure that it's a consistent color. So you want to take any red that's at the bottom and just very gently bring it up through the top. And then boom, there you go. You've got some carrot juice.
That looks awesome. That looks nothing like carrot juice. And hopefully it tastes like
we just call it carrot juice because it has dead rabbit and it's orange, okay? I'm like, I did not hire me for my naming skills.
I totally didn't get that until just now when you mentioned that it's because it's the rabbit. I get it now.
Yeah, and then you can, if you want to feel fancy, you can get a little orange wedge and bop it on top. But if you don't have an orange wedge, that's totally fine.
We came prepared. You sent me a list, and I made sure I got everything on the list.
Nice. All right. Well, once you have your fancy schmancy orange wedge, then feel free to nose it and get all of the olfactory glands working, and then just dive right in.
So this is my very first cocktail with the dead rabbit. I've had my share of drams of it by itself, but I've never had the cocktail. So you put the orange, like I saw you put it kind of like.
I just flipped it on top. Yeah, but I mean, like, that's because I just think it looks kind of cute to have that little orange wedge on top. But honestly, if you're making drinks for yourself at home, you put that orange wedge in however you like.
I like it.
There's no judgment here. Unless you're using another whiskey, in which case, all the judgment. Yeah, so this is one of my favorite drinks for, those days when it's kind of sunny and, like, it's perfect for brunch, if it's kind of like mid-afternoon and you're like, I'd like to have a little tipple, but, like, I don't want to go too crazy. It's a really smooth sipper. There's like that touch of bitterness from the Campari. Obviously, the orange juice brings a lot of freshness, and then you just have a little sneaky bit of whiskey in the back there. And it just adds a little bit of vanilla and caramel notes. But yeah, so this is the carrot juice. So, I mean, this is something that you can sip upon while I regale you with tales of the dead rabbit. So you have enjoyed it as a dram. It is an Irish whiskey. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Irish whiskey. Because I don't know if everybody knows the story, but at one stage we almost didn't have Irish whiskey. Like, it almost ceased to exist. So, like, it's pretty crazy. So it's kind of like a roller coaster ride where it's going to be, like, super insane. There's going to be gasps. There's going to be sadness, but then there's going to be like jubilation at the end. So we're going to start at the very beginning of the story. And for anybody who is a fan of Scotch, I'm sorry to tell you, but the Irish actually invented whiskey first. So now that we have that controversial piece of info,
we can enjoy the rest of the pot.
We're just gonna casually toss out this very inflammatory remark, not address it, and then move swiftly on. So,
oh my goodness.
In Ireland, we were making Irish whiskey for quite the while. So we ended up actually making it and incorporating it into part of our daily life. So Irish people, so distillation originally came from the monks. So when they would travel across through across Europe. They would gain kind of more information from the mainland, and then they would return back to Ireland. And when they came back to Ireland, they brought back the knowledge of distillation. And, you know, there was a lot of different things that happened, but essentially at one stage, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle between the church and the King of England. And he essentially was like, I don't know if we want to have this anymore. So he kind of turfed all of the monks out. So the monks ended up dissipating amongst the rural folk. And the knowledge of distillation spread really, really quickly and really easily. Because before that, monks would have kind of like been cloistered. They would have kind of stayed apart. Whereas now they were kind of hoofed out of all of the monasteries. And so they were able to kind of like mingle amongst everyone else. And then suddenly you had random farmers that were like, well, sure, I'll just make some whiskey from the grain that I've got growing here. And then whiskey ended up becoming an integral part of life. So whenever there was a funeral, if there was a marriage, if someone was born, it was like, great, bring out the hooch. So it became like, it was a much more viable way to get more money for your grain. Right. So if you were a farmer, it made sense financially for you to make whiskey as well. And because of that, the Irish whiskey industry actually grew pretty big. And we have this time period that we refer to as the golden era of Irish whiskey. And it was a time period in the 1800s where we essentially ruled the world of whiskey. So at that time, Irish whiskey was responsible for 60% of all global whiskey sales. Right. So we were outselling bourbon, we were outselling scotch, we were outselling every other style of whiskey. And we're a tiny, tiny little island. But on our tiny island, we were producing up to 10 million gallons of Irish whiskey per year. They estimate at the peak of production, we had 20,000 operating stills. That is a lot. Now, obviously, in the industrialization side of things, you know, you would have distilleries with like 2, 3, maybe up to 6 stills, but they're also, you know, kind of doing estimates for all of the rural distilling that was going on. Because as I said, like the farmers had this knowledge. So it meant that like, you know, Tom, Dick and Harry down the road, they could all have their own stills and it was totally fine. So that is a massive amount of liquid for our tiny little island to make. And so, you know, we became like well known. So if you walked into a bar anywhere in the world in the 1800s and asked for a whiskey, they'd actually just hand you an Irish whiskey. That's how synonymous we were. For whiskey, it was Irish. And the best of Irish whiskey was actually made in Dublin. So much so you'd pay up to 25% more for a bottle that was made in Dublin versus a bottle made anywhere else on the island.
Talk about a premium. Wow.
It's crazy. Like we're at this point where like the British aristocracy, their kind of evening tipple became Dublin's sipping whiskey. So that's what the aristocrats were drinking, and the British Empire was continuously expanding. And so they were essentially bringing Irish whiskey to the 4 corners of the globe. And we were dominating, you know, we were doing really, really well. And then it all went to shit. So, like, I mean,
wasn't it like the international like temperance movement and everything, especially in America, because that's where most of the Irish whiskey was going at the time, right? Is like a majority of what they were selling was going into the American market, and then temperance hit and everything just
everything went insane. So the temperance movement was also in Ireland. So, you know, you had a huge amount of women that were protesting and saying like, you know, that essentially whiskey is the devil. Nobody should be drinking it. They're taking fathers away from their families. You know, the normal temperance stuff. But there was a lot of different factors. So, you know, there was also a gentleman by the name of Aeneas Coffey, and he was actually the Inspector General for Excise in Ireland, which basically meant he was a tax collector. And he was feisty by all accounts, ended up in a couple of shootouts, and overall was just, I mean, he's a tax man. I don't know how likable tax people can be. Sorry to anyone who's a tax person, but like, let's be real, you know, like the rest of us folk aren't really like super excited to see a tax person. But he patented a new piece of technology known as a column still. So in Ireland, we were using pot stills, so they're the ones that kind of look like a pot, and it works basically in batches. And with the column still, it is a column, it's continuous. But the biggest difference would be that there's a massive change in flavor. So if you're cooking something in a pot, in a batch, you can imagine that the flavor is going to be a little bit more intense. If it's a continuous kind of like, almost like a factory line, you know, where it's just kind of continuously going in and out, it doesn't, the spirit doesn't get as much flavor as you would from a pot. Right. So the Irish whiskey industry in general, the majority of Irish whiskey makers at this point, they were the kind of be all and end all for the world of whiskey. And they were like, we don't need some tax man coming in to tell us how to make our whiskey. And so the majority of them were like, yeah, no, we're good, thanks. And they actually started up a propaganda campaign where they referred to it as the silent spirit. They were like, there's no taste, it's terrible, nobody buy this stuff. So in his copy was like, well, I suppose if they're not really digging it in Ireland, let's try Scotland. Now, at that stage, Scotch production would have been very, very scattered. So it would have been predominantly rural-based. There wasn't a huge amount of industrialization. There wasn't really a massive industry at that time. Right. But when you bring over the column still, if you're essentially making whiskey faster to produce and cheaper to produce because it's continuous, theoretically, you could run it 24/7. I mean, obviously you can't because you have to clean it and et cetera, but right. Theoretically, you could make whiskey almost nonstop instead of like you have one batch, you wait for that batch to cool, and then you take and you clean it, and then you have to put in another batch. So the kind of rise of the column still in Scotland really, really helped to push the industrialization of the industry of Scotch. Wow. And then obviously you've got the Temperance Movement. As I said, it was very active in Ireland, but there's also kind of 3 major global events that occur within 6 years. And it's just a series of unfortunate events, really. So in 1914, you have World War I. I mean, like a global war is not good for selling whiskey, for obvious reasons. But also, you couldn't. There was in Europe they kind of put like a hold on grain. So if you had grain, it was supposed to go to feed the soldiers or to feed kind of the general population. So It was considered kind of like, you know, look, don't be making whiskey. We kind of need it to survive, which is understandable. Yeah. And so it greatly damaged kind of the sales of whiskey and the production of whiskey. But 2 years later, in 1916, in Ireland, we have what is known as the Easter Rising. And so Ireland used to be a part of the British Empire. And with the Easter Rising, that's when Ireland went, you know what? We'd kind of like to be independent. And so this is when Ireland's like, hey, maybe we want to be independent. And the British Empire is like, I don't know about that. And then there's a bit of a kerfuffle. And then eventually, you know, the British Empire are like, okay, you can have this part and that can be your republic, and we're keeping this tiny bit in the north. Very controversial, but important for the kind of story of Irish whiskey history. Because, you know, if Irish whiskey is the kind of tipple of choice for the British aristocracy, and suddenly Ireland is no longer a part of the British Empire, they're not going to financially want to support an industry that is now technically competition. Right. And so what this does is this moves the British Empire's focus onto Scotch production. They're like, well, you know, instead of giving money to an outsider, let's generate our own wealth. And so they started to invest a huge amount of money into the Scotch industry, which further helped the industrialization. And then they put really high tariffs on any Irish products that were going into the British Empire. So Ireland is kind of a small island, and so to the east we have the UK, and you know that essentially was like the gate into the rest of the British Empire. Right. So we have to look west, and that's where we have to look to the US. Yeah. And then in 1920, 4 years later, we have Prohibition. So you know, like within 6 years, the industry is taking a pounding. Like it's a terrible time for the Irish whiskey industry, you know? Yeah. And so you've got kind of the regular, like, you know, with Prohibition, you can't sell alcohol. So that's obviously going to impact sales. You know, we're like a tiny island with a population of a couple of million. We're making 10 million gallons per year. We like to drink whiskey, but we physically can't drink enough, you know, not to keep the industry alive. But there's also like a secondary issue. So, you know, Irish whiskey would have been considered kind of the whiskey of choice, which meant that it commanded a higher price. So when people were bootlegging and making moonshine, they would essentially make moonshine and put it into Irish whiskey bottles so they could get higher prices, because you were going to get a higher price than if you were going to get a locally made whiskey.
Right.
So this resulted in a lot of speakeasies in the US would have gotten bottles that were labeled Irish whiskey, but they were actually full of really poorly made moonshine. And so the reputation for Irish whiskey would have actually been severely damaged by the impact of having these bootlegged bottles, essentially. So they would have been like, hey, wait, this was really good. No, it's really terrible. And, you know, like if you're a consumer in a bar and you have a bad experience, it's going to stick with you a lot more than the positive experiences do.
Yeah.
It's just how it is. So, yeah, I mean, you know, that's a lot within 6 years. And so it's you know, massive. So by the time we get to the 1970s, we only have 2 operational distilleries on the entire island. So, you know, we had gone from, you know, 20,000 operating stills where we've got industrialization and we've got local production. And then suddenly, almost in the blink of an eyelid, that's all gone. We've got 2 operational distilleries, and they're essentially like, you know, everybody's trying to come together to try and just salvage what they can from this industry. And it was a really tough time period. By the time we get to the 21st century, there's only 3 operating distilleries. Like, this is how bad it was. Like, Irish whiskey was clinging on, you know, by the fingernails, just trying to stay like alive and, you know, hope that someday that we could get back up to ruling the world. So this is obviously the sad part where it's like, oh no, we only had 3 distilleries, but
whatever will we do?
Drinking whiskey. I'm just tugging at the heartstrings now, you know. I'm like, I'm bringing you up and then taking you down, and then we're going to go back up again.
Okay, well, right now where we're at the low point, let's take a break from the history and let's do another cocktail. So because we're gonna do a tasting with the whiskey, but I wanna and it's perfectly named Dive Ball, because we go down. So let's go to the Dive Ball and teach me how to
This is one of my favorite drinks, and this is actually our signature serve for Dead Rabbit. So you're going to need a tall glass, and then you're obviously going to need your Dead Rabbit whiskey. And so for this one, you are going to need, I'm so sorry, I have to translate all of the measurements into ounces.
Well, okay, I can reiterate. I did that too. Because you sent me the milliliter, and I got nervous, and I was like, oh, okay, she put the ounces with it, so we're good.
Yeah. But that took a while. There was a lot of math that I didn't expect.
A lot of Googling, I bet.
Yeah. Google is my best friend. So are doing 1.5 ounces of Dead Rabbit. Now, for this, you don't need any fancy equipment. You can just whack it all into the glass.
Oh, okay. So are we putting ice in the glass first, or?
So I put in the kind of other ingredients and then fill it up with ice and then put tonic, but that's just from years of working in a bar. If you fill a glass with ice and then try to pour liquid on a full glass of ice, the liquid kind of like spills everywhere. So it's like a habit in my brain where I'm like, you must put the liquids in first. But you know, if you're at home, then you do it however you want. If you want to live dangerously, you go wild.
So I wanted to ask, because I've never heard of the Peychaud's bitters. So is there a particular reason that you go with the Peychaud's on these, rather than, you know, any other type of aromatic bitters?
So Peychaud's is one of my favorite bitters. So I mean, everyone knows Angostura. I thought I brought it. Oh yeah. So everyone knows Angostura. It's kind of the bottle that's on every bar. You can see the label's kind of too big. It's delicious. It's phenomenal. It's so good. But it is very, very earthy. It's very bitter. It's very like almost medicinal. Whereas Peychaud's was kind of made in New Orleans, and it's kind of like more representative of the flavors. So this is going to be something that's a little bit more citrusy. It's kind of like it's got more lighter flavors. So whereas Angostura is very kind of like dark and kind of earthy and very bitter, with the Peychaud, the bitterness is kind of like a little bit lighter. There's a little bit more spice. And so I chose to use Peychaud's because when you're using the Angostura in something that's quite long, it can become quite overpowering. Okay. So, you know, you want to make sure that when you're drinking cocktails that you're still able to taste the whiskey. So with the Peychaud's, I just feel like it has the right flavor profile to kind of work really, really well with the dead rabbit. So it is a beautiful bitters, and you know, it works really, really well. It's actually the bitters that you use for a Sazerac cocktail.
Oh,
So
perfect.
Sazerac is like the fancy version of an old fashioned, and this would be the bitters that you would use instead of the Angostura. So it's much lighter in profile. So we're going to use 2 dashes of this, and they all come with little dasher bottles, so it's super easy to use. And then we're going to get some sea salt.
Yep, a little bit on the top. It's a pinch.
Yeah, just a little tiny like crack. If you have one of these, you can do like a half crack. If you have a little pinch, take a little tiny pinch. And yeah, then we're going to add our ice and a kind of like a low tip, yes, to fill it all the way to the top.
Almost there. All the way to the top, and then just the tonic water, right?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll just. Perfect.
And then get your tonic water.
Tonic all the way to the top, right? As well?
Yes.
And then just spin it.
And then you get your fancy spoon, and then you stir. I actually forgot my tonic water. Can you believe this? Here I am.
Your spoon?
I have my spoon. I just don't have my tonic water.
Oh no. Well,
I
was gonna say I'd love to send mine, but it might be a little difficult to get it over the pond this quickly. On such short notice.
Like 2 seconds, and I will return.
Well. Ooh. Man, those bitters, yeah, those are different. I'm kind of curious to try the Peychaud's in like a old fashioned, see if it affects the flavor much. They definitely have definitely more of a citrusy, fruity, in your face aroma.
It's beautiful in cocktails. So the Sazerac is like the funky version of the old fashioned. So the old fashioned gained popularity in New York, and they heard about it in New Orleans, and they were like, "Oh, have you heard about this old fashioned?" And they decided to kind of like jazz it up. So instead of using bourbon, they used cognac because it was kind of the main spirit that was passing through New Orleans. And then they rinsed the glass in absinthe, they use sugar, and then they use Peychaud bitters instead of Angostura. And then they use the oils from a lemon instead of an orange. So it's just kind of like a jazzy version of the old fashioned.
The more you know. I love that.
Yeah. So again, here's another drink. It's not too high in alcohol, and it's quite refreshing. You've got that tonic. You've got a little bit of sea salt just to kind of add some more depth and to really kind of play off the sweetness of the whiskey. And then the Peychaud bitters are going to add kind of more citrus elements, and then you can garnish with a funky orange wedge again. And yeah, so it's just a good, lovely little sipper.
I was going to say, it just looks like a light little spritzer cocktail. It's just perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. And really good, if you're kind of eating like eggs and steak, which is like my favorite brunch food.
High protein, perfect.
Yeah, so it cuts through, like, if you're like, I don't know if anyone's like me, but like I love steak, so like it can be a little bit overwhelming. So this kind of cuts through a lot of that kind of like greasiness really well. So it is really, really good. And also because you've got a little bit of that sea salt, you do kind of it's not too like starkly contrasted, so it's not too sweet. And it's not really going to interfere with your food. If anything, it's just going to kind of add to your food. So it's a really, really good one for brunches.
Awesome. Well, now that we have our second cocktail, let's climb out of the abyss that was that Irish whiskey depression, and let's see the light. Show us the light, Stephanie.
Okay, so. Well, I mean, we're drinking whiskey, which is very exciting.
We already got it. All right, game over. We can end the podcast.
Well, actually, this is this whole presentation. But yeah, so there's a lot of distilleries operating on the island. In my notes here, it says 37. So I think another few have popped up since we spoke about this, actually. But yeah, so we have a lot of distilleries. There are plans for like a minimum of 40 distilleries to operate on our island, which again is quite tiny. In 2009, we sold about 6 million cases of Irish whiskey globally. And then by 2019, it was 12 million. So we doubled in 10 years, which is amazing. Yeah. We're also the fastest growing spirit category in the world, which is like awesome. But a part of that wave, and like for me, I think a large part of kind of what helped Irish whiskey to climb out of that hole was this bar called the Dead Rabbit. Oh, why is she talking about history? My God. But yeah, so if you haven't heard, the Dead Rabbit Grocery and Grog is a bar that's based in New York, and essentially it was set up by two guys from Ireland, Jack McGarry and Sean Muldoon, and it is an Irish whiskey focused cocktail bar. So they opened their bar in 2013 in the middle of the financial district in Manhattan, and they helped to bring people into the world of Irish whiskey. So if you look at like Irish whiskey drinking trends before they opened the Dead Rabbit, now obviously they're not the sole reason, but they definitely helped a lot. Yeah. But the drinking kind of mentality was, it's 2 fingers in a glass. Don't even look in my direction with like ice or water. Like, don't even look at my glass. You know, it was just like paddy cap on, some man is just kind of grumpily guarding his whiskey, and that was it. You couldn't drink whiskey any other way. That was just these were the rules. You had to be grumpy, you had to be old, you had to have a paddy cap, and you couldn't use any water or ice. And then these 2 guys come along and they're like, you know what? Let's just throw Irish whiskey in a load of cocktails. And before this, you know, we had already seen the kind of start of the cocktail revolution, and that was very heavily carried by bourbon. So bourbon-based cocktails like Manhattans, you know, like the old-fashioned, and gin. So it was the likes of Negronis and the Martini, etc. Irish whiskey had 2. So we had the Irish coffee, which is an after-dinner drink. So you're not going to sit in a bar and slam a load of Irish coffees all day. And if you do, then like go to your doctor because you probably have a heart condition. And then the other one was the hot toddy, which is like what you drink when you're sick. Again, if you're sick, you're not going to drink like 6 or 7 of them. So the guys basically brought Irish whiskey into many different kinds of cocktails. So, you know, they are a bar that has won almost every award you can win in the world of cocktails. Okay. They've won Best Cocktail Bar, Best Bar Team. One of the owners won Best Bartender in the World. Wow. Best cocktail menu. You know, they've won everything that you can win as a bar. So they're really a landmark cocktail bar globally for the cocktail revolution, but they had a really key influence on the growth of Irish whiskey because they helped people to see past, you know, that old man guarding his glass to realize that you can have Irish whiskey in a variety of different ways. And it does work within cocktails. And so, you know, they decided after a couple of years of selling everyone else's Irish whiskey, they were like, wait a second, we're Irish. We should have an Irish whiskey. And so they decided that they were going to make an Irish whiskey. So they paired with us. So we are the Dublin Liberties Distillery. Our master distiller at the time was a guy named Darrell McNally, and he had like over 20 years experience within the industry, which is amazing. Like he was up in Bushmills, and like, you know, at the start of the 21st century, we only had 3 distilleries. So to find people with that level of like knowledge of the Irish whiskey industry was really hard and really rare. So we were really lucky. So he came in, he worked with the guys, and they basically created this liquid. Now, what is it that we are drinking? So let me just take my bottle and be all like, oh, bottle.
Yes, the beautiful. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I love the style of the bottle too, because it's got that very like that like the black and the gold and the white, the pops. It's got the like, I forget what the name of the style is, but it's kind of like I always refer to it as like a Great Gatsby. Like it's that, kind of like 1920s, like roaring 20s, kind of fun, like dressed up, but going out and having a great time kind of style. I'm a big fan. I unfortunately I haven't been to the bar yet, but that is high up on the list.
Yep.
I've heard amazing things.
Gotta go. It's kind of hard to describe, but like it's a banging bar with really good drinks and a very good Irish whiskey selection. But yeah, so what is it? So we're drinking a blended Irish whiskey. So
Right.
within Irish whiskey, we've got 4 styles. We have malt, which is made with 100% malted barley, and made in pot stills. So it's kind of like very, very rich and oily. And then we have pot still, which again, it's you're using some malted barley, but you're also using some unmalted barley. And maybe if you're lucky, you can throw in a few other grains. Again, in a pot still, that's like again super oily, quite rich, and very distinct in flavor. And then we have grain. So grain is made in those column stills. So it's much lighter. It's quite floral. You get a lot more green notes. And blended is the 4th category, where you take 2 of the others and you just mix them together. So this is blended. It's a blend of malt and it's a blend of grain. And the reason that you would do that is because you're trying to get the best of both. So as I said, malt is like quite intense in flavor. It's a very distinctive flavor. It's very heavy. It kind of coats the whole mouth, and it's very much when you're drinking a single malt, you're drinking a single malt. And they wanted to create a whiskey that was like, complex enough for people who like whiskey, but also to have it accessible enough that if you haven't had whiskey before, or you've only had 1 or 2, it's not going to be too overwhelming. Right. And so that's why you've got the marriage of these 2 kind of styles of whiskey, and you're blending them together. Okay. And then it is 44% ABV or 88 proof. So legally, to be called Irish whiskey, it needs to be bottled at 40%. So there's a lot of Irish whiskey on the market that's bottled at 40%. But the reason this one is 44 is because they wanted to find kind of that sweet spot. So there was a load of samples sent over to the Dead Rabbit Bar, and they basically used different strengths to make classic cocktails. And then they decided as a bar, they were like, actually, 44 seems to work really well, because you need to have a little bit of extra strength so that it comes through all of the other flavors in a drink, but you can't have it too strong, because then as someone drinking whiskey, it might be a little bit too much on the palate. Yeah. So 44 was kind of that sweet spot where a whiskey drinker is happy to drink it neat without any messing, and it also is strong enough to work within a cocktail. So it's like bam, bam, and so you've got a multifaceted whiskey. Okay. The most exciting part, though, and my favorite part about this whiskey, is the aging process. So it is aged for a minimum of 5 years. So it's a 5-year-old Irish whiskey. It's a little slightly older, depending. But yeah, a minimum of 5 years in ex-bourbon barrels. And with ex-bourbon barrels, you're getting all of that sweet stuff. You're getting all of that caramel, toffee, fudge, and vanilla, obviously. So much vanilla. But Jack and Sean decided, they were like, you know what? We are Irish. However, we've kind of found our success in America. And that's kind of like the dream of America, is that anybody can go, and if you work really hard, you can just build this life. And there was a massive influx of immigration in the 1800s from Ireland to the US. Mm-hmm. And he was like, well, the 2 of them were like, let's kind of create a whiskey that reflects the journey of an immigrant. And so you've got 5 years within ex-bourbon, which is very traditional within Irish whiskey. But then we finish it off in virgin American oak hogshead barrels. So these barrels are 90 liters, which is half the size of your typical bourbon barrel. So when the barrel is smaller, it means that the surface area is bigger. So the whiskey and the wood interact much like on a much faster, much more intense level. And they're virgin American oak. So they've been charred to a medium char, the virgin American oak. And this is where you're getting a lot of characteristics of bourbon. So, you've got all the kind of vanilla and the caramel, all the softened notes. But once you put it into a virgin American barrel, it's like, bam, here you are. You've got, fresh shaved wood. Yeah. You've got a lot of black pepper spice, a lot of coffee from that dark char, dark chocolate. And it really adds kind of a feistiness. There's a bit of a kick to Dead Rabbit that you don't find in every Irish whiskey, because of the finishing that we do in those virgin American hogshead barrels. And that was very deliberate. And, the whole idea was like, it's almost like an Irish whiskey with an American accent.
So now, quick question: the aging in the virgin American hogshead barrels, are those aged in Ireland as well, or are those aged over in America? Okay, so, all the aging is done in Ireland.
Yeah, legally, to be called an Irish whiskey, it has to be in Ireland. Yeah, fair enough. It has to be on the island of Ireland. So I mean, this is what they've created, multifaceted whiskey designed for people who like whiskey, but also people who like cocktails. I mean, now that we've kind of talked about it, I feel like it's probably time to like sniff it and taste it.
Do a little, just the whiskey tasting. All right, let me grab a glass.
So, a couple of things for whiskey tasting. I always recommend that people have a little bit of water on the side. And I'm going to go full nerd here, and we're going to do a very sciencey type of tasting. Okay, so this is like my favorite thing to do, because like you'll find that there's a lot of people that are like, oh, I don't like whiskey, and then you go through this super nerdy way to do it, and then they're like, well, actually, I might like whiskey. So, I mean, it's helpful if you have a whiskey glass like this, but if you don't, you can get something like a wine glass. You really just want to have something that kind of like channels, like.
You know what? I in place. So when you sent me the list for the cocktails, I don't have a Nick and Nora glass. The closest thing I have is essentially the just minor wine glass. So I'll be doing that. And unfortunately, in my fortitude of planning for this, I did not think to grab a Glencairn or a whiskey glass. So we're gonna be drinking whiskey out of a wine glass, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I mean, if you're at home, I regularly drink it out of these rocks glasses. Like,
but I will say, the first time I did drink the Dead Rabbit was out of a Glencairn, and I will, from now on, also drink it out of a Glencairn or a whiskey tulips glass. So we'll do it in a different glass just because why not? But
of course,
I'll take these tips. I'll do is I'll rewatch my video so I can get extra views, and I'll do it in the Glencairn glass at home. That way I can get all these fun notes and.
This is the honesty that you get that you don't get with every YouTube channel. I'm telling you.
Exactly. We're all about honesty here. Is it honesty and whiskey? That should be my slogan.
That's the tagline. PourCast, honesty and whiskey.
I like it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make anyone feel isolated. You're at home. As I said, I have a very, very blasé attitude. Like, if you want to drink it out of like a protein shaker, you go wild and you do you.
Hey, it's like I try to say, there's no wrong way to drink whiskey, and there's no bad whiskey. It's just whiskey you may not particularly enjoy. So, if you want to drink it out of, like you said, a protein shaker, power to you. That's the way you like to enjoy whiskey. There's no wrong way to do it.
We are no longer judging people for how they drink whiskey. You drink it however the hell you like.
I like that. No longer judging. All right. So let's do this tasting. So what are the steps here?
So basically, I'm going to go through how we process flavor. And these are the steps that I recommend anytime you're trying a new whiskey. And we're going to talk a little bit about adding water, about adding ice, and what that does. So, we need to engage three senses. So we're going to use our eyes, our nose, and our mouth. And the first thing you want to do is you want to hold it up to the light. I mean, it's better if it's natural light. If it's not, that doesn't matter. And then you're going to gently roll the glass so that the liquid kind of like coats the sides of the glass. So what you want to do is you want to look at it and just kind of observe the color. And when you look at something, it's like, there's that phrase of like, you eat with your eyes. The first bite is with your eyes. So when you're looking at something that you're planning to ingest, you're kind of sending those signals like, hey, body, get ready, because this could be a wild one. And another thing, just to kind of engage the eyes a bit more, is that you'll notice that there's kind of little droplets. I don't know how well you can see that. Oh my God, I'm terrible. I'm not a good YouTuber. But there's little droplets on the side of the glass. And so within wine, these are called legs, but we are Irish and we are very poetic. So we call them tears. So the tears roll down the glass, and so you can see after you've kind of rolled it, then you can kind of hold it straight, and you'll see that the tears will very slowly start to fall. So these are the little droplets on the side of the glass, and they start to roll down.
Oh, okay, you can see it better on your camera.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm like
a little bit better. Yeah,
so little droplets, they roll down, and so you want to just kind of look at them, and this will give you a really good indication of what the mouthfeel is going to be like. So if the droplets roll really fast, then you know it's something that's going to be light, it's going to be quick, it's going to be like a flash in the pan. If you've got the little droplets that roll a little bit slower, that's going to indicate that the whiskey is going to be a little bit more viscous, there's going to be a little bit more texture. And so, the droplets on this, they're pretty slow. So we know that this one's going to linger in the palate a little bit longer. But it's engaging our eyes to let us know that we're going to be eating. The next thing is the nose. Do not stick your nose straight into the glass. This is 88 proof whiskey. Now we process, it's estimated up to 85% of flavor through the olfactory gland, which is a gland located at the back of your nose at the roof of your mouth. If you shove your nose in, you basically, it's like, you know, a giant siren or a megaphone beside someone's ear, and they're just like, wait, what? So what you got to do is you got to be real gentle, you know, you got to like start at chin length, and then you got to kind of waft the glass. And yes, you feel weird. And yes, you look weird. But like, it's totally cool because you're like really getting into it. So you slowly inhale, bring the glass up slower and slower. And this allows your nose time to acclimatize. Now, once you feel comfortable, then you can start sniffing. So you can take some deep breaths. Now, the interesting thing about the olfactory gland is that it's actually located really close to where we store memory in the brain. So what happens is that every time we smell something, our brain goes through the index and says, I've definitely smelled this before. Where have I smelled it? And most of the files that we keep are associated with emotion. So when you smell something, so if, for example, you smell apples, it's very common that people will be like, oh, I know this is apple because my grandma used to make apple pie. Or, oh, I know that this is lavender because my mom had lavender at the front of the house. So, you know, it's quite interesting, but it also helps if you've had it recently. So if you really want to get into whiskey tasting, it's a really good idea to just smell everything because you're basically building that index. Yeah. So then it'll be much easier for your brain to kind of find these flavors and be like, oh, I recognize this. This is burnt orange. Oh, this is ground coffee. So, you know, we got to get our nose in, going to process it, try and think about what does this remind us of. Now, the tasting part is where you're really going to, if you have someone who doesn't like whiskey, I feel like this is the game changer. So we're going to do a 3-step tasting process. Ooh. So the first step, we're going to take an amount into our mouth, and then we're going to use it like mouthwash. Okay, we're going to hold it on our palate for 10 seconds. Now, I feel like at any other whiskey tasting, they would be like, Steph, what are you doing? But it's science. So you're going to take it in mouth, you're going to like roll it around, you're going to get your lips, your gums, your cheeks, your tongue. And what you'll find is that everything is tingling. Everything's going crazy. Now, we're not trying to process flavor here. What we're trying to do is we're trying to acclimatize the palate. So we've acclimatized the nose. We need to now acclimatize the mouth. And there's a really interesting fact. So basically in Germany, they did a study where they realized that every single time you eat something, half of your brain disengages from the food and checks your lungs, your heart, and your stomach, because it needs to know, have we been poisoned? And the second bite, when it's like, okay, we haven't been poisoned, second bite, your whole brain engages, and that's why you get so much more from the second taste of something. So with the first taste, you're not looking for flavor. You're just trying to get all those tingles in. The second taste, what I want you to do is this is where you're going to do a little bit of wafting. You're going to kind of nose it a bit. Then you're going to take a larger amount into your palate. You're going to hold on your palate for about 5 seconds. What will happen is that your mouth will tingle, but it will die off much faster because your brain will go, oh wait, we didn't die. This isn't poison. It's all okay. After you swallow, you're going to do this really weird thing where you breathe out through your nose with your mouth open. So like this, you look weird. You're going to feel embarrassed. It's totally fine. Like there's now a record of me doing this on video, but what you're trying to do is engage the olfactory gland. So when you're exhaling out your nose, it's going to send these little flavor aromas over and under. And so
the smell receptors and the taste receptors simultaneously.
Yep. And then when you breathe back in, take a deep breath. And then you'll find that like there'll be little flavor aromas that are still kind of hanging around near the olfactory gland. So when you inhale back in, you get a lot more of that flavor. And so this is where so the second taste is always going to be so much better and you're so much more engaged than the first taste. So if you don't like something on the first taste, that's totally fine. You go for the second taste and then you kind of really get into it. Basically just sip it till you like it.
Just keep drinking until you like it.
This is my advice.
I gotta ask because I just thought of this is so that mention of like the first taste, your brain is like only like half your brain shuts off because it's worrying about poison, and then the second taste it opens up and is that where the phrase "first is the worst, second is the best" came from? I don't know if you ever heard that.
I've never heard that.
Oh, I think that takes me back to like middle school. Whenever you would come in second place, you're like, yeah, first is the worst though.
Oh my God. No, we didn't have that. I guess we were more like emotionally supportive of each other in Ireland, you know?
Not here in America. We're competitive folk.
Yeah, I don't think we're very competitive enough. We're too chill, you know? It's like, oh, you know, if someone else wins, you're like, yay. Everyone's just happy to be here.
Right? Or football, unless you're watching football.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, yeah. Well, it's like, okay. So I'm not a sports person. So my experience has always been everyone's lovely and everyone's really, really happy. So like potentially like sports people are going to be like, no, we're like super angry about this. But I don't know. I'm not a sports person. I can't say. Okay. The third step. Okay, so you should have some kind of room temperature water. So normally when you're doing tastings, you kind of see this and you'll see like little pipettes and stuff. This is going to sound really, really strange, but if it's the first time tasting a whiskey, I recommend for the third sip that you add as much water as there is whiskey in your glass. So let's say you've got like, you know, like if you have this much whiskey, you're going to add this much water. Okay. And so you're basically kind of like halving the alcohol content. And then after you add the water, you're going to swirl it because you have to try and mix those two together. Because naturally, water and alcohol are going to be a little bit like shy around each other. So you got to like aggressively just be like, bah! And so this is not how I recommend you drink whiskey for enjoyment. This is really just from a scientific kind of point of view, trying to get into the bones of the flavors of alcohol. So if you buy a whiskey for the first time and it's the first time you're tasting it, this is a really thorough method to try and get the maximum amount of taste. Okay, so now you've mixed it.
So we're mixing water in now, right? The 1 for 1. Yep.
1 to 1. And then it seems like a lot. I know there's like a lot of people that are like, oh my God, you're ruining the whiskey. But this is not about enjoying the whiskey in a bar or in a social setting or after work. So this is just about trying to get into the bones of it. So you need to swirl it to make sure that that's all mixed up. Now, we're going to go through all of those steps again. So we're going to look at it. And what the first thing you'll notice is that those tears, they're like flies. You know, really they're just dropping. Yeah. This is because what we've done is we've changed the texture of the whiskey. So any oiliness that would be in the whiskey is now completely diluted. So you're going to notice a lot of different changes within the whiskey when you drink it. So texturally, it's going to be different. Flavor is going to be different. And so, yeah, we just need to go through all those steps again. So you've noticed already the tears are falling. Next up is the nose. So you want to do the same thing again. You're going to kind of waft it. And what you should find is that I always describe flavor as like it's a very oh my God, like distance thing for me. So when I'm drinking something, there's flavors that I feel like are here, and when I add water, it's like they kind of like get pushed forward.
Brings them into focus a little bit.
Yeah. It's like it's easier for me to pick those kind of harder to detect flavors. So with the nose, I want you to take some time. Again, try and go through that index in your brain and be like, does this smell different? You know, are there flavors that I maybe got a hint of before, but now suddenly they're like really forward?
You know what's really strange is the way that I'm noticing picking it up right now is I mean, obviously it's going to be a lot more approachable with that much water, right? Because it's lightening it significantly. But when I did the aroma initially with the whiskey by itself, it was very like bold, like a lot of wood and like bold flavors. And now, or smells, and now I get much lighter, like more decadent. I almost smell like pears, like fruity, almost on the nose.
Yeah,
still have a little bit of a wood smell, but you know, there's more lighter flavors that seem, or aromas that seem to populate.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, this happens, like this is true for like a lot of whiskeys, you know. So when you're tasting whiskey, like this is why I'm like, you know, it's just scientifically, if you want to find all of those flavors. And if you do this and you build this into your index of like, okay, these are the flavors, then the next time you're drinking it undiluted, it'll be easier for your brain to recognize the periphery flavors, essentially.
Literally training your brain to pick up those scents, right?
Yeah. So now the final step is to do that kind of like last sip that you did. So where you're holding it on your palate for 5 seconds, swallowing and then exhaling in that really weird way with your mouth open through your nose and then taking a deep breath in. So, I mean, as I said already, instantly different texture. It's like it doesn't hang around as long. It's gone almost instantly, but also you don't get as much as a tingle. And obviously, when you're kind of doing a 1-to-1, you're cutting the ABV, so it's like should be around 20% ish, and this is like optimum. So basically, when you're tasting alcohol, the flavor molecules are just very excited,
Yeah.
And so when you're lowering the ABV, they are excited, but they're kind of dispersed more, so they're not like super in your face. And so this is where, like, if you like, this is for kind of figuring out a whiskey when you first meet it. But if you're in a bar, I'm like, a lot of people ask me like when to add water, when to add ice. So like, I would always say that like there is no singular answer. Obviously, drink whiskey however the hell you want to drink it. If you want to drink it out of a shoe, then I am not here to judge you. However, scientifically, anything that's going to be over 45% ABV or 90 proof, I'd recommend that you add a little bit of water, because those molecules are going to be super, super intense. So you can add like, a drop, you can add 2 drops, but it'll just help a little bit, because the molecules are so active that they can really overwhelm your olfactory gland. Yeah. And then with ice, so when you cool something down, you're basically, the molecules, the flavor molecules, they kind of get a bit sleepy. It's like when you put a lobster in a fridge. It's kind of like, oh, okay, I'm just going to...
No. Oh, no. Oh, no. Shit. What happened? Did I lose you?
Oh, hello. I'm here.
Okay. We lost you at the lobster. Okay, we're good.
Oh, okay.
Okay. We're all right.
Okay, cool. So you can hear me and see me fine?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, cool. I have somehow lost you guys, but I can hear you. So this is exciting. Okay, cool. I'm just gonna like talk randomly because I can't see you for any of those visual cues. But yeah, lobster. So when you put a lobster in a fridge, lobster kind of gets a bit sleepy, and that's the same with flavor molecules. So if you are, drinking in a bar that has aircon and the ambient temperature is like pretty chill, so like in Ireland, it's quite regularly pretty chilly here. If you put ice in, it will make the molecules kind of go to sleep a bit more.
Okay.
Whereas, alternatively, if you're in somewhere like Thailand, where, they don't really use air conditioning, if you're like at an outdoor bar, it's just kind of those fans, and the ambient temperature is really, really hot, which means that your whiskey is going to be hotter. So the flavor molecules get way more excited. And so it's almost like in those like very specific, like extreme circumstances, you almost can't drink the whiskey if you don't have ice in it when you're in Thailand, because the molecules are so aggressive and they're so excited that you do need to add ice to kind of like calm it down. So like, I imagine, I have never been to Texas, but I've heard that it can get really hot.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'd never really thought about the science behind drinking in a specific temperature. We drink outside in Texas all the time in the middle of summer, and that's an interesting thought. I really want to give that a trial, like trying it with on ice or even with a little bit of ice in the glass in the heat to see if that affects the flavor.
Yeah. So, it's just about kind of like whether the molecules are super excited or they're kind of super sleepy. So that's why it's like, if you want to experience the whiskey as the distillers intended, then I recommend you don't add ice if you're somewhere that's really, really cold. And I recommend that you do add ice if you're somewhere really, really hot. And then you can kind of like, if you taste it and you're like, well, actually, it's still a bit too aggressive for me, then by all means, add ice, add water, add Fanta, add whatever you want to do. That's fine. That's fine. There's no wrong way to drink whiskey.
Cheers to that.
Sláinte.
Sláinte V.
All right. I think I'm like, hold on, let me just check on my little thing if there's, I guess I can tell you guys about the story of the name, because I feel like that's pretty funny. Do you want to have another drink while I tell you the story of the name to make our last cocktail? Or will we leave the last cocktail till after?
Let's since we went through the tasting of the whiskey itself, let me rinse this out a little bit. Let's do the last cocktail, and then let's wrap up with just a little more on the Dead Rabbit itself.
Sweet. Okay,
This
cool.
best cocktail is a little involved from what I could tell. At least there's a lot of ingredients.
Yeah. Okay. So
But don't pay with it.
basically, what we're making, it's called Good Good Not Bad, but it is a whiskey sour. So that's
Okay.
all it is. It's just a whiskey sour, but we're making it a bit funky by utilizing pickle juice.
I love it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I gave you kind of the general specs that I use. So it's 1 3/4 ounce of dead rabbit, and then 3/4 of an ounce of pickle juice, half an ounce of sugar syrup, and then 1/3 of an ounce of lemon juice. And really, it's kind of like those are very, very vague and kind of broad, because if your pickle juice is more acidic, then you're going to need to use less lemon juice. And if it's not acidic enough, then you need to increase the lemon juice. So with the pickle juice that I normally use, which is just from a jar that I bought in the shop, it works really well at those specs. So yeah, we're making a whiskey sour.
Okay, so what are we putting everything together in the shaker and then ice and shaking it? Okay.
No ice. No ice. So you're going to put everything. Yeah. So
we have egg whites, so we're frothing those a little bit, aren't we?
Yes. So this is called a dry shake. So if you're shaking without ice, it's called a dry shake. And the reason you do that is because you basically want to like shake up all those egg whites. And egg whites, what they do is they are an emulsifier. So they kind of like hug all of the ingredients and hold them together. So when you have a cocktail that has egg whites in it, when you take a sip, all of the flavors are present. Whereas if you don't have egg whites in it, what happens is that it'll hit different parts of your tongue at different times. So it's a really interesting thing to add, and it kind of it just helps everything to come together. So yeah, so you're going to add them all into your shaker. If you don't have a shaker, you can use a jam jar. It's totally fine. And then you're just going to seal it up, and then you're just going to dry shake it. So you just want to activate the egg whites, get them super white and fluffy. And then when you've done that for a minute or two and it's like looking all white, then you add your ice and then you shake. And this is one where I'd recommend you shake hard, because you want to like take out all of your anger on those egg whites. So I'm just going to like pop over here to get some ice and then shake really hard.
All right. I'm a little slower at this, so I'm catching up. But so I've got the pickle juice, the simple syrup, the lemon juice. I'm just gonna have to hand squeeze this lemon. Oh, this is gonna be messy.
It's kind of sticky and it's kind of messy, but it's really delicious.
Oh, I'm excited. You know what's funny? I have a little tool for this at home, and again, I didn't think about bringing it.
Oh, but this is kind of like, I guess, the fun of traveling is that, like, you know, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention? One of those. That's a phrase.
It's either words and, you know.
Words and things and words. Sorry, so I'm going to shake this, so it's going to get a little
bit. 1/3 of an ounce. Perfect. Good. I don't have to squeeze too much.
See.
And then egg whites.
Yes.
I'm excited. I'm always a fan of a cocktail with the frothed egg whites. It adds such a light, airy, fun texture to it.
For anyone who's vegan, you can actually use the brine off of chickpeas.
Really?
Yeah, so it's it's kind of a really strange ingredient to use, but I mean, if you have a can of chickpeas, save your liquid, and then you can use it in place of egg whites if you're vegan. It's just one of those kind of strange things.
So, okay, so how much shaking? Just a little bit?
Yeah, if you've already pre-shaken, then you don't need to shake it as hard, but I mean, try as long, but try to shake it hard. Just because it's kind of like the orange juice where, you know, the idea is to try and aerate it, because when you aerate it, it expands and it gets kind of bigger and fluffier and the texture is much nicer.
All right, with you being a cocktail specialist, what is your secret for pulling, you know, when you have the two cups, you know, they form that seal? What's your secret for getting it off quickly?
Okay, so if you have those shaker sets, when you seal them, so you want to seal them like this. So you don't have it in the middle. You kind of create this line.
Oh, okay.
And then you place it on something that's sturdy, and then you give it a back. And so that creates the seal. But it has to be on something sturdy. If you're like trying to do it in the air, it might not create the seal well. And then when you shake, You know, like you're shaking away and it's all fine. So then when you want to open it, if you've done it this way, then all you do is hit the opposite side. So you just give it a little bap, and you can see it kind of snapped out.
Oh my goodness. It's the secret. I love it.
Yeah. Just keep that straight side. Okay.
So we have our cocktail made up. There's no garnish on this, right? It's just the bitters were part of it, correct?
Yeah, bitters on top. So I basically just, I mean, some people shake with the bitters inside. I think it's quite nice if you just kind of do a little dash on top. I mean, you know, if I was in a bar, I'd make it much prettier. But the idea of having the bitters on top means that when you go to take a sip, you kind of get those aroma from the bitters, you know? And then, yeah, so I mean, it's going to be super silky. It's going to be, you know, really, really smooth, really delicious, super easy to drink.
It's so strange too with the pickles. It's like, it's smooth, silky, but it's also got a little bit of that tang you get from the, you know, the pickle juice.
Yeah. So.
Oh, that's delicious.
It's so good. And so one of the like key flavors that I find within Dead Rabbit is actually black pepper spice. So I find that on the finish.
Yeah.
And, you know, it does have like sweetness to it from the ex-bourbon casks, but with the black pepper, you can play around with a lot of savory elements.
Oh yeah.
And so, you know, it's like, so it works really, really well with the pickle juice. And it's just this, like, it makes it a really good, like, basic sour. But if you're adding in some pickle juice, it just kind of adds this whole other element. And again, you know, this is like pretty delicious. It's easy to drink. And because it has that savory element, you can have it with food. So again, another great choice for brunch.
Perfect. Oh, this is wonderful. I think this is my favorite cocktail so far.
Yay! Oh my god, I love this cocktail.
It's so good.
Pickles, though, so like if you like pickles, this is a winner. But yeah, it's really silky, and that's because we've made sure that we agitated those egg whites, that they're all super frothy and airy. It's the same thing with the orange juice, you know.
Yeah.
The aeration is going to add so much to the texture.
Awesome.
Okay, so let me just wrap up by telling you a couple of fun facts about the name.
Yeah.
All right, so it's called the Dead Rabbit, the bar and the whiskey. And the Dead Rabbit name comes from a gang in New York from the 1800s. So I touched a little bit about, I mean, I think everybody at this stage knows that, you know, a lot of Irish immigrated during the Great Famine. They immigrated to the US, they landed. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that at that stage, we would have spoken Irish. So we didn't speak English. So when we landed, we had nothing. We had come from a famine background, you know, we didn't have food. We literally had the clothes on our back and we had like pidgin English at best. So when we came to the US, immediately we were discounted as foreigners. And it was like, put them into like the slum areas, keep all of the foreigners together. So we would have been put in with Italians, with Polish people. And it was kind of like, just get them over there. And there's this very famous area called the 5 Points in Manhattan. And this area actually used to be swampland, and they reclaimed it, and then they built on it. Now, I don't trust engineering in the 1800s, so like reclaiming a swampland sounds terrible. And it was pretty terrible. So they built all of these tenement buildings on like very questionable land. And obviously the buildings are like slowly sinking. It's falling into disrepair. The streets are running with like, you know, feces and human excrement, like awful. So this area of the 5 Points was actually referred to as the worst slums in the Western world. Wow. Like it was known globally, this single area. And so, you know, they lobbed in everyone. They were like, anyone who was undesirable just kind of got pushed into the 5 Points. What happened with the Irish was that, you know, there would have been a lot of kind of young men that would have been guerrilla fighters against the British because, you know, they weren't necessarily very happy with having the British Empire controlling their lands. And so a lot of these men would have been like pretty good at fighting and, you know, like pretty strong. And so what they ended up doing was they formed gangs, and they were a social necessity. You know, so basically the police of New York, they were like, we're going to make sure that you guys in the 5 Points don't do anything to us New Yorkers, but we don't care about what happens in the 5 Points. So like you could go into the 5 Points, you could, you know, like you could murder, you could steal, you could do whatever. And the police would do nothing because they weren't your police. They were New York's police. And so the gangs were formed to protect those who weren't able to protect themselves. So they would kind of like get all of their, anything that they could, you know, make any money, any food, they would kind of try to band together because it was the only way that they were going to survive. And so these gangs were like trying to help protect the Irish. Now, there was a lot of resentment against a lot of immigrants coming in. And so you had what were referred to as the native borns. So these would have been the Americans that were born on American soil. And they were like, we don't like these people so much. And one of the kind of most famous gangs, or at least the kind of ones with regard to the Dead Rabbits, was the Butcher Boys. So the most famous Irish gang was called the Dead Rabbit, and the most famous kind of native American gang was called the Butcher Boys, and they would fight really regularly. Wow. So the Butcher Boys were like, we don't want any of these kind of immigrants taking our jobs. You know, I guess kind of like the normal stuff that you don't really want other people in your neighborhood. And then the Dead Rabbits were like, well, we're just kind of here to work and survive. So like, you know, be chill. Yeah. So they have a lot of clashes. So my favorite story is in 1857, and it's the Dead Rabbit Riots. So the Dead Rabbit Riots were the biggest riots that had ever been recorded in Manhattan's history up until that point. Wow. And what happened was the Dead Rabbit gang were like, you know what? We've had enough of this. Those Butcher Boys, they look down upon us, and it's no good. So on the 4th of July, which is Independence Day, they were like, those Butcher Boys are going to be pretty distracted with all the parades and the fireworks. So what we're going to do is we're going to just like attack their base. So they went into their clubhouse and they basically broke every single piece of furniture. They ripped up the dance floor. And most importantly, because they are Irish, they drank every single drop of alcohol.
Wow. Nail in the coffin on that.
Like, this is gold. Like, this is like another Irish. So after this, they return back to the 5 points, and they actually get other kind of Irish gangs to come together to have this kind of final stand to be like, we're not taking this anymore, you know? And so the Butcher Boys come back, find everything destroyed, and they're like, well, I guess we have to go fight the Dead Rabbits. So they go on off. There's this massive riot, and it goes on for 2 days. So the police attempted to like stop the riots. And whenever the police kind of came close, all sides, it didn't matter who you were, all came together and fought against the police because they were like, this isn't your turf, this isn't your territory.
Common enemy, right?
Yeah. So there's actually like, so the police gave up. They were like, washing our hands of this. We're going to go hang out at the station. And there was one guy who was like, oh, because there's always one guy. There's always someone who's like, I can do it. You know, he was young, he had bright, shiny eyes, and he's like, I'm going to be the one to put an end to this. So he like, you know, soldiers up. And at this point, they were kind of like the leader of the Dead Rabbit and the leader of the Butcher Boys. They were fighting on the roof of this building. So he like, you know, he's the policeman. So he's kind of like elbowing people out of the way. And he's like, I'm the law. And he's like, his plan is I'm going to get to the 2 leaders and I'm going to arrest both of them. And then boom, that'll be it.
Everybody's just going to back off. Like...
Yeah. Obviously, that doesn't happen. It gets up to the roof and everyone stops fighting to be like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I'm here to arrest the leaders of the gangs. Everyone laughs, and then they strip him naked, leave his pants on, and tie his wrists and send him back to the police station with a very stern, don't get involved. So after that, then they actually have to call in the National Guard. And so the National Guard has to come in, and then everything dissipates. But like, they don't know, to this day, they don't know how many people died in these riots because they didn't want the other side to know. So what happened was they would they would collect all of the bodies of the fallen, and then they would hide them in places. So they would hide them in like in the basement, or they would like build them into the walls, or they would take them outside of the city for burial because they didn't want to be seen as weakened. Because if they were seen as weakened, then you know they could lose everything. So it's strange. So like when you say the word gang, obviously there's a lot of negative connotations, but it's actually at that time period, it was kind of almost a necessity. But yeah, and then how they got the name is like, essentially there's 3 different stories because they were kind of legendary within New York. So the first story is like probably like the most real story, but definitely the less interesting one. But basically there was a reporter for like some big New York newspaper. He went down to the 5 Points trying to find this like rebel gang who were like changing the world. And then he saw them and he was like too afraid to like directly interact with them. So he spoke to this old lady and he was like, do you know who they are? And she was like, yeah, they're Rob Age. And so Rob Age in Irish would mean like a big hulking like guy, like just a big dude. And you know, she probably didn't really speak English that well. And he was like, oh, dead rabbits? Yeah, totally. And so he runs a story with dead rabbits, and then suddenly that's their name. But the other 2 stories are much more interesting. So the first one is that whenever they went to war, they would have dead rabbits on a pike, which, you know, I mean, that's pretty like badass. And it kind of like reminds me of like Braveheart or something, you know, where they're like running to war. And then the third one is that it was like a signal. So if you were at a meeting in the gang and you decided that you were unhappy, you would throw
down a dead rabbit, right?
And be like, I declare war. And I'm like, that's your, like, you could throw any dead animal into a circle and I'm pretty sure that declares war. But apparently, myth has it that it was a dead rabbit.
Well, I mean, dead squirrel, dead pigeon, none of those really inspire fear. Dead rabbits, like, you know, that's badass. But you wouldn't say dead bunnies. That would be, you know.
No, you'd lose everything. The whole gang is just leaving you.
Get them out of here.
They're going over to like, I don't know, the tiger gang around the corner.
So another thing I was reading that kind of contributed to the name of the distillery, not so much the gangs, but and correct me if I'm wrong, but that the original distillery, Dublin Liberty's distilling location, was a tannery where they tanned rabbit skins, right? So that kind of contributed a little bit also, aside from the gang, you know, history in America. But on the Irish end, there's actually history. It's super coincidental that both had rabbit origins.
Yeah. And like the thing is that building that we have in Dublin is over 400 years old. So it was originally called like the Mill Building, and it's on Mill Street. So it was a mill, but it also, like, I think at one stage it was a furniture factory. And then just casually, they didn't find this out until after they bought it. But yeah, casually at one stage it was a tannery and they used to skin rabbits. And they were like, oh my God, this is
dum. Like, perfect. That is so cool to me. That's super cool. Awesome. Very cool.
We accidentally found a water source. So
really?
Yeah, so we had bought the building and we were like, you know, kind of like, if you ever get a chance to go, then like, you know, anyone who wants to come, like, absolutely come over. It's a beautiful distillery. We tried to salvage as much of the original building as possible, but it's 400 years old. So there's a lot of stuff we had to renovate and we had to put in new foundations. And like, accidentally, they found a well 30 meters underneath the distillery with like super cool water. So the water, like, you know, for distilling, you have to make sure that it has like the perfect amount of minerals, etc.
Right.
And apparently this is just like super clean, super fresh, perfect water for distillation. So we just casually accidentally found it.
Well, it's like, I mean, there's certain like in Kentucky and Tennessee, like there's limestone heavy like water sources underground that they utilize, so it's like perfect amount of minerals. They don't really have to oxidize or do anything to it chemically, but that's really cool. And you know, I know you're going to hate me for saying this, but aside from the tannery portion and striking gold in water, which is gold for whiskey, good quality water, it must have been the luck of the Irish.
Definitely. No, I'm like,
no disrespect on that one, but I couldn't help myself.
Like, not like that's so bizarre. Like, you don't buy a building and be like, I think we'll build a distillery here, and then like find out, oh, guys, they used to skin rabbits, and we're like the company that makes dead rabbit whiskey. Oh, there's also coincidentally this like pristine water source that's just casually under. Because like, do you guys know Teeling's whiskey? Mm-hmm. So Teeling's whiskey, like, we are on the same block. So on one side of the block is our distillery. On the other side of the block is their distillery. So they could have had that water source, but we have the water source.
But you found first. #first.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Oh my goodness.
That's the Dead Rabbit story. I mean, there's probably more stuff, but like three
That's
cocktails
the
and a whiskey
main,
taster would go
the
well.
coup de grace. That's the main stuff,
Mhm.
the meat and taters of it. Fantastic. Oh my gosh. Oh, Stephanie, this was so much fun. I was so, really excited. Like I said, I was really excited when you reached out to me because one, I've been wanting to expand internationally anyways with the channel, but the Dead Rabbit, funny enough, is, and I'm sure you saw the post and everything. It was just like super happenstance. Like I've been wanting to try the Dead Rabbit for years. My wife got me the book that was made that like the Irish whiskey book, but that was made.
Barley to Blarney.
Yes, that one.
Yes, it's such a good
and I
book.
read that like a year ago, and it like from that I was like, Dead Rabbit, that's on my list, high on the list. I gotta get it. And luckily, a buddy of mine lives in the New York City area, and he's like, all right, I saw your channel. Let me know if there's anything I do to help out. And I'm like, have you seen Dead Rabbit? Can you find it? If you can, all right, send me a bottle. And he did, and I tried it. And of course, the day the package gets to me is, funny enough, the day that I am diagnosed positive with COVID. So it's like, I get the package, I'm super amped, and then I lose my sense of smell and taste. I'm like, well, all right, building anticipation for it, It's like,
my God.
It's the unluckiest of moments. But, I waited a month. It was perfect because I did like a whiskey, Irish whiskey week during St. Patty's Day. I had got my taste and smell back. It was perfect. I tailed it off with a Dead Rabbit. I was super happy. And then you reached out and I was super excited because Dead Rabbit, I don't have any personal association with it, but I just love, like I said, the aesthetic. I've heard nothing but amazing things about the bar. And, to me, a little bit the exclusivity of the fact that you can really only get it in New York and Ireland. I was just like, I had to have it. Stars in the eyes, So thank you so much for joining me today. This has been
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Anything else you want to mention about the Dead Rabbit or the bar in New York? Any promotional items? Go see it.
If you're in New York and you don't go to the Dead Rabbit Grocery and Grog, then you're missing out, because not only are the drinks amazing, but like they ship in ingredients that are Irish ingredients. So like
they have one of the biggest Irish whiskey selections in at least New York, if not America, don't they?
I don't know about the whole of the US, but I'm pretty sure it's for New York, because obviously they are Irish, and like a lot of their team are Irish as well. So they have really good relationships. So stuff that you typically might not be able to buy in the US, they have, because everyone knows them and everyone's like, well, like it's fine, it's the guys.
Well, plus, it's really easy to import to like the New York City area because that's just one of the larger hubs in the US for imports from Ireland right over the Atlantic. So, that makes it very easy for them to get what they need from the island. So, but that's definitely on the list for sure. It's funny, I think a year before, we were living in Boston and we had visited, my wife and I had visited New York City, and I hadn't known about the Dead Rabbit at the time, but I wish I had, because I would have been right there. I could have gone seen it. But no, and I believe the bar is 3 stories, 3 levels. They have different levels and different like themes in each bar, like the parlor, and it's so neat the way they do it. It's very different.
It's like, I mean, if you have any interest, though, like obviously I kind of like harped on about like them bringing Irish whiskey into cocktails, but like first and foremost, Jack and Sean wanted to bring Irish hospitality to the US.
Absolutely.
So that's what it's all about. And they tried to bring if you guys have ever been in Ireland, that if you walk into you can just close your eyes and spin in circles and point at a bar, walk in, and everyone's just so there's just this atmosphere within Irish bars that you don't necessarily get outside of Ireland, and they managed to kind of recreate that. So there's a lot of it's almost chilled energy where everyone's really, really relaxed, but enjoying themselves. It's just, I don't know.
Well, and what I was mentioning before we jumped on, the thing that I love and respect about the Irish pubs, and I thoroughly enjoyed, was it's you just unplugged. Like, and I've talked with, Barry Chandler from, Stories and Sips. He loves mentioning it, like his Friday night lock-ins. It's like that crack, right? That's the Irish term for like just casual conversation where it's, there's no TVs, there's no distractions. People aren't on their phones. They're just sitting there and maybe enjoying some music, some local music and songs. It's such a communal space.
Yeah.
And that, I feel like we need more of that, especially now where everything's digital. We need a way to unplug, somewhere to go to just have a drink, have a casual conversation, be humans together, be meat sacks together and just have a good time. And I definitely get that feeling in Irish pub style, which is cool. And again, I really want to get to the pub in New York for sure.
Yeah, because they managed to kind of recreate that on the ground floor, and then it's when you kind of go up, it kind of gets like progressively more like cocktail influenced,
Yeah.
So like,
cool, then it's got like something for everyone,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fantastic. It's such a good bar. But yeah, I mean, like also, like just like chilling beans with humans. We're actually in Ireland. We're still on lockdown.
Really? I didn't expect that. I thought, because I know I'd seen that Europe is kind of a little bit ahead of the US in respect to like, respecting the fact that COVID exists. The mask mandates and all that stuff. But I didn't know you guys were still in lockdown.
Yeah. So our bars haven't been open since March last year. No, yeah, March last year.
So they weren't open at all, even with masks?
No. So there were some bars, if you served food, you could open for outdoor only, but you could only have 15 people outdoors.
Do they have a projection of like when they're gonna an idea they might opening up? I'm assuming
we might be opening up in June.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, I don't want to commit to anything because it's changed so
After
much.
2020, it's just like, well, maybe.
Yeah,
you never know what else is gonna hit.
It's a different story. Yeah, but yeah, so we haven't had like, I'm really missing like bars because like it's really communal. But for Irish people and a part of Irish culture, like a massive part of Irish culture is all of our kind of like socialization is centered around bars.
Right.
Like, and it's sometimes it's a bit of a pain. Because, like, if you have one friend that doesn't drink and it's like, everyone's going to meet in the bar. And then they're like, I don't really drink. And you're like, oh, what do we do? Like, what do you do outside of a bar?
Yeah, we got water.
There's fizzy water or water.
Oh, too funny. All right. Well, I was hoping to be an hour. We were an hour and a half. But again, good crack. And I enjoyed every minute of it. Stephanie, thank you so much for taking time with me today. Just side note for everybody, following PourCast, we have, Last Cut Crystal, who is a glass, cutter, and he does the Shot Zweisel style, which is very similar to Glencairn, just a little bigger. So for those of you that enjoy whiskey a lot, you want a lot of whiskey in one, more efficient, there's a 10% off discount code for PourCast. This is Last Cut, LASTCUT. And then we also have Wood and Whiskey, who is a woodworker in upstate New York, who is offered a 10% discount for PourCast for any woodworking, wine and whiskey shelves, blanket chests, cutting boards, things like that. So, and PourCast, as I mentioned, we're moving more towards the live stream like we're doing with Stephanie here, which makes it very much more accessible for distilleries and breweries that are all over the country and all over the world. And hopefully, this opens us up to more opportunity to have awesome conversations with folks like Stephanie at Dead Rabbit Whiskey. And that's it. It's thanks everybody. We have, I'll be obviously publishing the recipes for these cocktails, and, Stephanie at Cocktail Shen on Instagram. And she's also, on Facebook, and you can reach out to her with more awesome recipes for not only just the Dead Rabbit, but, any other amazing cocktail ideas. She has some really great, great ones. And thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on board. It's been so awesome. I hope we get to meet in real life.
One day. Well, hey, I'll be sure to let you know, because my wife and I love Ireland. So, and as I mentioned, we went there on our honeymoon 2 years ago, just before COVID. But we only really toured the southern part, so there's so much more,
Oh man, yeah.
And so much more even in the southern part that we didn't get to hit in 5 days. So yeah, we'll be sure to let you know, and then you can give us the real down low, underground
and not safe for work tours.
Yeah, the not safe for work tour. There you go. All right, well, Stephanie, you stay safe. I know you're in the afternoon, so it's 5 o'clock by you, 5:30 at this point. We're just starting the day off, so there you go. You got plenty to go. Thanks again, and take care. And as I always sign off with everybody, keep pouring.
Keep pouring.